The aroma of hickory smoke hung thick and tantalizing in the late afternoon air, mingling with the excited chatter of early arrivals. My backyard, usually a quiet sanctuary, was bustling with purpose. Flags draped from the fence, tables laden, with vibrant salads and glistening buns awaited their meaty counterparts, and the grill, a beast of charcoal and seasoned grates, roared with a comforting intensity. This wasn't just any BBQ, it was a gesture of heartfelt gratitude, a humble thank you to the brave men and women of our local fire department. I'd spent days planning, marinating, and perfecting, envisioning a relaxed evening of good food and camaraderie for the true heroes who selflessly put their lives on the line. As the first few firefighters, still in their duty shirts and looking pleasantly surprised, made their way towards the sizzling hot dogs and burgers, a warmth spread. Through me, a sense of quiet satisfaction that comes from doing something genuinely good. Then, the first wail sliced through the evening, a distant siren that steadily grew louder, more insistent, closer. My smile faltered. It couldn't be. Not here. Not now. The siren intensified, a guttural shriek that dominated the peaceful hum of conversation, and suddenly, a colossal red engine, lights flashing like a disco gone rogue, rounded the corner and lurched to a halt directly outside my house. My jaw probably hit the perfectly manicured lawn. The handful of firefighters already inside my yard exchanged bewildered glances with their colleagues now stepping out of the enormous truck. And then I saw her, my neighbor. Her face, usually a mask of detached disapproval, was now contorted into a triumphant, almost gleeful smirk visible through the lace curtains of her front window. It was at that moment, as the entire fire department began to descend on my humble cookout, that I knew she had called them, on my BBQ, for them. And so began the most absurd, infuriating, and unbelievably true story of my life. The moment was a surreal freeze frame. My meticulously arranged backyard, the bewildered faces of the initial firefighter guests, and the sudden, overwhelming presence of an entire engine company now blocking my quiet suburban street. From the gigantic truck, several more firefighters disembarked, their expressions a mix of professional alertness and profound confusion. Their captain, a man whose face was etched with years of handling genuine emergencies, approached me, his brow furrowed, a clipboard in hand. "Sir," he began, his voice deep but tinged with a bewildered politeness, "we received a report of arson risk and excessive smoke coming from this address. Specifically, a call alleging a large, uncontrolled open flame posing a significant threat to surrounding properties. Is everything all right here?" He gestured vaguely at my perfectly contained charcoal grill, which at this point was mostly radiating a gentle heat, certainly not an uncontrolled blaze. My eyes, however, were already darting towards the source of this ridiculous alarm. Mrs. Gable, perched like a gargoyle in her living room window, her thin lips stretched into a triumphant, almost predatory smile. The truth hit me with the force of a battering ram. It was her. It had always been her, in some form or another, with her endless complaints about my lawn gnome's jaunty hat or the audacity of my morning bird feeder attracting vermin. But this was a new, audacious level of pettiness, a declaration of war waged with sirens and emergency services. I tried to explain, stumbling over my words in a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. "Captain, I assure you, there's no arson risk. This is a BBQ, a planned, legitimate BBQ. And actually, it's for you, for the firefighters. A thank you. We invited some of your colleagues, they're already here." I gestured weakly towards the first group of firefighters who now stepped forward, nodding in agreement, their faces still wearing expressions of utter bewilderment. One of them, a younger man named Mark, who had been enjoying a conversation by the drinks cooler, chuckled. "Yeah, Captain. Smells more like appreciation than arson to me." The captain's gaze flickered between my smoking grill, the spread of food, and the now sheepish faces of his own crew members. A slow, understanding nod began to form on his face, replaced quickly by a mask of professional duty. "I understand, sir. However, we have to respond to all calls, especially those involving fire. Can you confirm the source of the smoke and ensure all safety precautions are in place?" His tone was firm, but I could detect a subtle undercurrent of amusement, or perhaps exasperation, in his eyes. He motioned for a couple of his crew to quickly check the grill, which they did with comical efficiency, declaring it within acceptable BBQ parameters. While they conducted their perfunctory inspection, a second squad car, clearly called in tandem, pulled up behind the fire truck. Two police officers, their faces equally serious, approached. "Everything okay, folks?" Received a report of a neighborhood disturbance and potential reckless endangerment. My frustration, which had been simmering beneath a veneer of polite explanation, finally began to boil. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a public spectacle, an insult to my guests, and a colossal waste of taxpayer money and emergency resources. My embarrassment was profound, a hot flush that started at my neck and crept up to my hairline. How do you explain to police officers and an entire fire department that your neighbor is simply upset you're having a good time? I decided to address the elephant in the room, or rather the Karen in the window. I walked over to the edge of my lawn, directly facing Mrs. Gable's house, and called out, my voice betraying a tremor of indignation. "Mrs. Gable, did you call the fire department?" Her lace curtains twitched, and then, with slow, deliberate movements, she opened her front door just enough to poke her head out. Her eyes narrowed like a cat watching a bird. "I called because I have a right to feel safe in my own home," she screeched, her voice surprisingly high-pitched and grating. "That smoke was atrocious, a fire hazard, and frankly, your gathering is disturbing the peace." "Disturbing the peace?" I retorted, incredulous, gesturing wildly towards the silent firefighters who were now trying to stifle grins behind their hands. "I'm hosting a thank-you dinner for our local heroes. These are firefighters, Mrs. Gable. They know a thing or two about fire safety." Her eyes darted to the firefighters, then back to me, momentarily losing some of their confident malice. "Well, how was I supposed to know?" She sniffed, pulling her thin shawl tighter around her. "All I saw was a dangerous amount of smoke, and your partying is always too loud. It's a quiet neighborhood. This isn't some public park for your hooligan friends." A few of the firefighters exchanged glances, a subtle roll of their eyes suggesting they were all too familiar with such neighborhood dramatics. The police officers, meanwhile, looked thoroughly unamused. One of them, a stern-faced woman, stepped forward. "Mrs. Gable, calling emergency services for non-emergencies can carry consequences. There appears to be no fire hazard here. This is a private gathering." "But it could have been," she insisted, her voice rising in pitch. "And the noise. I clearly heard laughter, loud laughter, and the smell of that greasy food. It's polluting my air. My respiratory system is sensitive. You know, I have medical conditions that are exacerbated by barbecues." Her claims grew increasingly outlandish, a desperate attempt to justify her actions, each word a new layer of absurdity. She launched into a monologue about her delicate constitution, the specific allergies she developed to certain types of smoke, which somehow only applied to my BBQ smoke, apparently, and her right to peace and quiet in her golden years. The initial guests, the real firefighters invited to the BBQ, were now hovering awkwardly, unsure whether to intervene or simply observe the unfolding spectacle. One of them, a burly man named Dave, stepped forward, a sympathetic but exasperated look on his face. "Ma'am, we're here to appreciate the community, not cause trouble." "We assure you, the grill is perfectly safe. We checked it ourselves." Mrs. Gable, however, was in too deep now. "Oh, so you're all in on it then?" she accused, pointing a trembling, bony finger at Dave. colluding with the noisemaker and the arsonist. This is a conspiracy. I'll be speaking to the mayor. I'll be speaking to the fire chief. I have pictures of that smoke." She even seemed to wave a phone in her hand, though it was unclear if she had actually taken any photos or if it was just a prop in her theatrical performance. The captain, seeing that reasoning was futile, turned back to me, a sigh escaping his lips. "Sir, it appears there's no immediate danger. We'll file our report, just try to keep the smoke to a minimum, if possible. And maybe, try to talk to your neighbor." The irony was palpable. The very people I was trying to honor were now having to mediate a ridiculous dispute. The police officers echoed the sentiment, advising that if the disturbance continued, it would become a civil matter, not a police one. As the fire truck, with its blaring lights now thankfully silenced, slowly began to pull away, followed by the police car, a profound sense of deflation settled over me. The festive atmosphere of my BBQ had been utterly shattered. The initial firefighters, bless their hearts, tried to salvage the situation, offering condolences and assuring me they still wanted to eat. But the moment, the spontaneity, the genuine joy, had been irrevocably tainted. Mrs. Gable, satisfied with her disruption, slammed her door shut with a triumphant thud. I looked at the perfectly grilled hot dogs, now cooling on a platter, and the bewildered faces of my guests, and felt a wave of crushing embarrassment. This wasn't the heroic appreciation I had planned. It was a public humiliation, all orchestrated by a woman whose only discernible motive seemed to be the prevention of happiness, especially if it was mine. The quiet hum of the neighborhood returned, but it was no longer peaceful. It was laced with the silent judgment of unseen eyes, the lingering scent of absurdity, and the undeniable truth that my good deed had just become a battleground. This was only the beginning. The aftermath of the BBQ turned emergency scene wasn't a sudden explosive confrontation, but a slow, creeping chill that settled over the cul-de-sac. The immediate departure of the fire trucks and police cars left behind an unnatural quiet, heavy with unspoken judgment. My remaining firefighter guests, bless their resilient spirits, tried their best to make light of the situation, still grabbing burgers and exchanging jokes, but the festive energy had evaporated, replaced by a lingering awkwardness. Their professionalism was commendable, their efforts to reassure me genuine, but the public spectacle had been too much. After they eventually left, thanking me profusely despite the bizarre interruption, I was left alone in my yard, surveying the remnants of what should have been a joyous occasion. The grill, now cooled, seemed to mock me with its inert presence. The decorations, once cheerful, now felt like symbols of a failed endeavor. My gaze kept drifting to Mrs. Gable's house, its drawn curtains a silent, smug declaration of victory. That night, sleep was elusive. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside felt like a clandestine conversation, a whisper about that BBQ incident. The next morning, the first sign of the neighborhood taking sides came in the form of subtle gestures. Mrs. Henderson, a sweet elderly lady from 2 houses down, usually reserved, appeared at my door with a freshly baked apple pie, still warm. "Heard about what happened," she said, her voice hushed, her eyes full of sympathy. "Don't you mind that, Mrs. Gable. She's always been difficult. You did a good thing for those firefighters. We all appreciate it." Her gesture was small, but it felt like a lifeline, a quiet affirmation that not everyone believed the absurd narrative spun by my neighbor. Later that day, young Billy Miller, whose family lived across the street, rode his bike past my house multiple times, giving me enthusiastic thumbs up, a silent, childish endorsement. These small acts of solidarity were comforting, but they also highlighted the underlying tension that now permeated the neighborhood. Then came the less subtle reactions. Old Mr. Finch, who meticulously manicured his lawn and usually offered a terse nod, conspicuously averted his gaze when I waved, hurrying into his garage as if I carried a contagious disease. A day later, I found a passive-aggressive note slipped under my gate. "Some people just don't understand the meaning of quiet enjoyment. Respect your neighbors. It was unsigned, but the blocky, slightly shaky handwriting was unmistakably Mrs. Gable's. It was a cowardly attack, an attempt to sow discord without direct confrontation. Yet it stung. The incident wasn't just confined to my property line, it had spilled over, infecting the very atmosphere of our community. The true impact, however, began to unfold online. I'd casually mentioned the BBQ incident on a local community Facebook group, hoping for a bit of commiseration from friends. I certainly hadn't expected it to ignite a firestorm. My initial post was straightforward. Had the fire department over for a thank you BBQ, ended up having the entire fire department over after a neighbor called claiming arson risk on my charcoal grill. Big thanks to our local heroes for their professionalism, even when dealing with ridiculous calls. Within hours, the comments section exploded. Some were supportive, echoing Mrs. Henderson's sentiment. "Oh, that sounds just like Mrs. Gable," or "Can't believe people waste emergency resources like that." Others, however, surprising me with their vitriol, took her side, or at least a highly generalized version of it. Maybe your smoke was excessive. People need to be considerate. Some homeowners clearly don't respect HOA rules, even if they're not in an HOA. The anonymity of the internet seemed to embolden the detractors, allowing them to voice opinions that they would never dare utter in person. A few days later, the local newspaper, the Springfield Chronicle, picked up the story, not on the front page but buried deep within the community section. The headline read, "Local man's firefighter, BBQ, leads to unexpected emergency response." The article, while factually correct, seemed to subtly lean towards Mrs. Gable's perspective, mentioning neighbor complaints and concerns about public safety, without fully condemning her actions. It quoted a local resident who wished to remain anonymous, which I strongly suspected was Mrs. Gable herself, or a close confidant if she even had one, expressing deep-seated concerns about noise and air quality in what used to be a peaceful neighborhood. Reading it felt like a betrayal, a confirmation that her distorted reality was gaining traction beyond just our street. It fueled my frustration, making me question whether I should have just ignored her, let her stew in her own bitterness instead of engaging, even indirectly. The tension manifested in small, everyday ways. When I went to get my mail, I noticed a subtle shift in how people greeted me. Some offered extra-long, sympathetic smiles, as if trying to wordlessly convey their support. Others offered quick, almost strained nods, avoiding eye contact, perhaps uncomfortable with the neighborhood drama, or, worse, silently agreeing with Mrs. Gable. I started hearing hushed conversations cease abruptly when I walked by, and occasionally, a car would slow down as it passed my house, its occupants peering subtly before speeding up again. It was as if my backyard had become a localized landmark of controversy, a silent battleground of neighborhood ethics. Even the garbage collection became a point of contention. One Tuesday morning, I found my trash cans, which I had dutifully placed at the curb, tipped over, their contents strewn across my driveway. It was petty, childish, and utterly frustrating. I spent 20 minutes cleaning up the mess, knowing, deep down, who the culprit was, but lacking any concrete proof. I considered installing security cameras, a thought that disgusted me. Why? Should I have to turn my home into a fortress against a spiteful neighbor? The psychological toll began to accumulate. The joy I once felt in my backyard, my sanctuary, was eroding. Every time I stepped outside, I felt her eyes on me, judging, waiting for a misstep. The simple act of grilling a burger now felt like an act of defiance, a challenge to her unspoken authority. The casual, friendly atmosphere of my neighborhood had been replaced by a subtle, unsettling undercurrent of suspicion and division. The silence that now hung heavy in the air wasn't peace. It was the quiet before another storm, the unspoken tension of a community forced to choose sides in a battle born from a BBQ. It was clear that Mrs. Gable wasn't merely content with disrupting one event. She intended to disrupt my entire existence within the neighborhood, piece by agonizing piece. And I, caught in the crossfire of her inexplicable malice, was beginning to realize that this wasn't just about a BBQ anymore. It was about reclaiming my right to peace in my own home. The subtle chill that had descended upon the neighborhood after the BBQ incident quickly intensified into a palpable frost, directly attributable to Mrs. Gable's relentless campaign of antagonism. The overturned trash cans had been a mere opening, salvo in what soon became a full-blown war of attrition. Her methods, while often petty, were insidious, designed to chip away at my peace of mind, one frustrating incident at a time. It began with the nuisance calls. My phone, which had previously only rung with pleasantries or work-related matters, now began to regularly chime with calls from obscure numbers. Upon answering, I'd either hear dead air, a sharp click, or occasionally a muffled, distorted voice whispering about violations or unpleasant odors. It was clearly her, but without direct proof, it felt like chasing shadows. This digital harassment quickly escalated to more tangible forms. One afternoon, I returned home from work to find my mailbox stuffed, not with junk mail, but with a series of anonymous, crudely typed letters. They contained excerpts from local zoning ordinances, highlighted sections on noise complaints, and menacing underlined phrases about community standards and preserving property values. They lacked a signature, but the passive-aggressive tone, the specific focus on trivial annoyances, screamed Mrs. Gable. It wasn't just annoying. It felt like a calculated psychological attack, an attempt to make me feel constantly under surveillance, constantly in violation. I tried to dismiss them, tossing them directly into the recycling bin, but the unnerving feeling they left behind lingered. Then came the incidents involving my property. My garden hose, which I always coiled neatly after use, was found mysteriously unspooled and left to spray water onto my porch overnight, leading to a slippery mess and a wasted utility bill. My lawn decorations, a whimsical collection of ceramic. Frogs that brought me simple joy were systematically moved, repositioned in absurd, mocking configurations. One morning, I found them all facing Mrs. Gable's house, as if silently saluting her. It was childish, but the sheer persistence, the constant low-level harassment, began to wear me down. It wasn't about the objects themselves, it was about the invasion of my space, the constant reminder that I was under her watchful, malevolent eye. Sleep became harder to find, disturbed by imagined noises, or the real anxiety of what new absurdity I might wake up to. My once tranquil backyard, a source of relaxation, now felt like a stage for her unending drama. The most infuriating escalation, however, involved official channels. After the initial fire department call, I thought perhaps she'd exhausted her public avenues for complaint. I was wrong. The first official letter arrived from the city's code enforcement office, a complaint about excessive noise at unreasonable hours, specifically mentioning loud machinery operating late at night. I was bewildered. I rarely used power tools, and certainly not at night. Then it dawned on me. My automatic sprinkler system. It kicked on at 2 a.m. She was reporting my sprinklers. Shortly after, another letter arrived, this time from the sanitation department, citing a complaint about improper waste disposal and attracting pests. An obvious reference to the overturned trash cans. These were legitimate city departments, responding to legitimate complaints, even if those complaints were utterly fabricated or maliciously exaggerated. I had to take time off work to call each department, explain the situation, and assure them I was complying with all regulations. It was a bureaucratic nightmare, a deliberate draining of my time and energy, all orchestrated by her. Each phone call, each email was a fresh wave of frustration, a subtle victory for Mrs. Gable, who was successfully making my life a living hell, one official inquiry at a time. My initial attempts to resolve the situation peacefully had, predictably, failed spectacularly. After the trash can incident, I had, against my better judgment, tried to approach her door again. I knocked politely, intending to appeal to some shred of civility. The response was immediate. A sharp, accusatory voice from behind the closed door. "I've already told you I'm not discussing anything with you. You're a public nuisance." Her refusal to even engage, her absolute conviction in her own righteousness, slammed the door shut on any hope of a neighborly resolution. My friends and family, who had been offering words of sympathy and advice, now started suggesting more drastic measures. "You need to get a restraining order," my sister urged, her voice tight with concern. "This is harassment. It's escalating," my closest friend, a pragmatist, suggested. "Install cameras, man. You need proof. She's going to keep doing this until she faces consequences." The idea of involving lawyers, of formalizing this absurd feud into a legal battle, felt alien and distasteful. I hated conflict, and the thought of spending my hard-earned money on attorney fees to argue over garden gnomes and sprinkler systems was profoundly depressing. Yet the alternative seemed worse. A continuous, eroding stream of harassment that threatened to turn my home into a prison. The constant vigilance, the gnawing anxiety of what she might do next was taking a toll on my mental well-being. My patience was wearing thin, replaced by simmering resentment. I found myself snapping at minor annoyances, constantly feeling on edge, unable to fully relax even in my own home. My energy was being siphoned away by her relentless negativity. The final straw came when a delivery driver, attempting to drop off a package, reported that Mrs. Gable had screamed at him from her porch, claiming he was trespassing and casing the neighborhood. He refused to leave the package, citing a hostile environment, and I had to drive across town to pick it up myself. It was a minor inconvenience, but it highlighted how her malice was now impacting even my basic daily functions, isolating me from the outside world. That night, after hours of restless tossing and turning, staring at the ceiling, I finally made a decision. This couldn't continue. I couldn't live under this constant siege. The time for polite appeals and hoping for a change of heart was long past. It was no longer about a BBQ or a few misplaced lawn ornaments. It was about my right to feel safe and secure in my own home. I pulled out my laptop, the glow illuminating my determined face in the darkened room, and began to search for local, legal services. The idea of a lawsuit felt heavy, an admission of defeat in the quest for neighborly harmony, but it was also a desperate grasp for peace. The escalation had reached a point where negotiation was impossible, and the only path forward, however unappealing, seemed to be through the formal channels of law. The quiet hum of the night, which had once been a lullaby, now felt like the countdown to an inevitable, messy, legal confrontation. My decision to consult legal counsel felt like a heavy weight, a concession that the battle with Mrs. Gable had transcended petty grievances and entered a realm of genuine threat to my peace. I'd spent countless hours researching restraining orders and nuisance lawsuits, the sterile legal jargon a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil she had inflicted. The initial consultation with a lawyer, a calm, pragmatic woman named Ms. Davies, left me with a clearer, albeit daunting, path forward. She meticulously documented every incident: the anonymous letters, the defaced property, the ludicrous official, complaints about my sprinklers and trash cans. She explained the process, the cost, the potential for a long, drawn-out battle. As she spoke, a sense of grim determination settled within me. I was ready. I had to be. My mental well-being, my right to enjoy my home, depended on it. I was about to sign the retainer agreement, committing to this arduous journey, when the unexpected call came. It was from Captain Miller, the very fire department captain who had responded to Mrs. Gable's absurd arson risk call on the day of my BBQ. "Hello, Captain," I said, trying to keep the weary resignation out of my voice. I braced myself for another complaint, another bureaucratic headache. but his tone was different. "Look, I know you've been through a lot with Mrs. Gable," he began, a genuine note of empathy in his voice. "Her complaints have been, well, let's just say exceptionally frequent for a while now, not just with you. Our dispatch log for her address is, frankly, legendary, and the police department is seeing the same patterns." My heart sank slightly. Had they decided to just dismiss her entirely? Was there no hope? "But," he continued, and this "but" changed everything. This specific incident, the BBQ for us, that really struck a chord with the whole department. We talked about it, a lot. And frankly, we're not comfortable with someone wasting public resources and harassing a good citizen who was trying to show appreciation for us. It sets a bad precedent. We decided to take a more active role. I paused, momentarily speechless. "Active role? What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Well," he explained, "we don't usually get involved in neighbor disputes, but this isn't just a neighbor dispute anymore. This is harassment of a citizen who was supporting emergency services, and it's a misuse of our time and resources. So we did some digging, and we found some interesting things about Mrs. Gable. She has a history, let's just say. A long, well-documented history of similar complaints in her previous neighborhoods. Petty grievances, constant calls to authorities for minor perceived infractions. She moved here after being encouraged to leave her last residence due to persistent nuisance complaints that had escalated into formal warnings." He paused, letting the information sink in. "We've pooled our resources with the police department. They've also escalated her file. We're not just letting this go. We're formally documenting every single call, every complaint, every interaction she's made with emergency services. And we're presenting a consolidated report to the district attorney's office, specifically outlining a pattern of harassment and malicious use of emergency services. We're also recommending a no-contact order, given the pattern of escalation." The words hit me like a revelation, a sudden burst of sunlight after months of oppressive shadow. The fire department, the very people I had tried to honor, were now going to bat for me. It wasn't just a polite intervention. It was a systemic response to a serial harasser. This wasn't about my private battle anymore. It was about protecting community resources and upholding justice for a pattern of behavior. I felt a surge of relief so profound it nearly buckled my knees. You're doing that? For me, I stammered, the disbelief evident in my voice. "Not just for you, sir," Captain Miller replied, his voice firm. "For the integrity of our services, for the safety of the community. And yes, because you tried to do a good thing, and you shouldn't be punished for it." He concluded by saying that they had already delivered the initial report and were waiting for the DA's office to act. He advised me to hold off on my own legal action for a few days to see if their official intervention yielded results. True to their word, within a week, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The anonymous letters stopped. The odd accidents with my property ceased. Mrs. Gable's curtains remained perpetually drawn, but her smug smirk was gone. Instead, I saw her house less as a fortress of malice and more as a silent, defeated monument. Then came the official news. A formal cease and desist order was served by the police, citing a pattern of harassment and misuse of emergency services. More importantly, the district attorney's office, armed with the comprehensive report from both the fire and police departments, initiated a formal investigation, threatening severe penalties if the behavior continued. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic arrest, but a quiet, crushing wave of official pressure that finally broke through her impenetrable conviction of righteousness. The effect was immediate and profound. Mrs. Gable, faced with the overwhelming evidence and the combined weight of two major public service entities, finally retreated. Not only did the direct harassment stop, but within a month, a "for sale" sign mysteriously appeared in her front yard. The ultimate outcome of her legal situation remained somewhat private, but the sheer fact that she was leaving was a victory in itself. The neighborhood, having witnessed the entire bizarre saga, now openly rallied around me. Neighbors who had previously been wary now offered genuine smiles, stopping to chat, sharing stories of their own minor run-ins with Mrs. Gable, creating a shared bond of collective relief. Mrs. Henderson baked another pie, this time a celebratory one. Billy Miller even helped me rearrange my ceramic frogs, placing them in a cheerful, defiant circle. The unexpected turning point wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a single moment of triumph, but the quiet, decisive action of the very public servants I had tried to honor. It highlighted a powerful lesson, that even in the face of relentless, petty malice, there are systems and people willing to stand up for what's right. My backyard, once a symbol of conflict, slowly began to reclaim its peace, its quiet hum no longer laced with anxiety, but with the subtle warmth of community solidarity. The whole incident, from the absurd fire department call to the quiet resolution, became a legendary tale within our neighborhood, a cautionary story about the perils of spite, and a heartwarming testament to the power of a good deed, even when met with the most absurd opposition. And as for my BBQ, it eventually became an annual tradition, a symbol of resilience, community, and the day firefighters came, not to put out a fire but to extinguish a neighbor's bitter flame.